Okay, so hi and welcome to the first Museum of Modern Shopping conversation. My guest today is Symeon Brown, who is a reporter and a journalist at Channel 4 News. Symeon's written for publications including Vice, The Guardian, Huffington Post, CNN, New Statements and The Voice. And his essay on the commodification of culture in East London was published in Safe on Black British Men Reclaiming Space, edited by Derek Owusu and published by Trapeze in 2019. His first book is being released tomorrow, I've just heard, and is called Get Rich or Lie Trying, Ambition and Deceit in the New Influencer Economy. So I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but I have pre-ordered it. So I guess I'll be getting it very soon.
You're a hero.
This is the first time I've pre-ordered a book. So
well, I'm very honored. I'm very happy to hear.
So I'm quite excited, but you don't know when it's coming exactly. But yeah, I've read a lot of your, brilliant reporting that's been in The Guardian on influencer culture recently, and also a few years ago, the Wolves of Instagram piece you did.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is the reason I've invited you, is to basically have a conversation that expands on ideas that run through our first exhibition, which just opened in Romford Shopping Hall in Romford, and it's on till March 27th. The show's called Andrew Warhola, which I should point out is Andy Warhol's birth name. And it brings together a selection of commissioned videos by nano influencers, which is defined as those with between 1 and 10,000 followers. Documentation of people, bodies performing for their cameras for social media that have been shared by various YouTubers and Instagrammers who have in turn become influencers themselves, kind of weird loop of influence. A collection of Andy Warhol inspired clothing that have been found on eBay and Depop, and a series of paintings of sponsored ads encountered on social media during the different lockdowns of the past couple of years. So the exhibition is trying to bring these things together, basically to try and tell a bit of a story of the architecture of influence that informs our practices of consumption today, and our relationships to brands, and our concepts of celebrity. So Symeon, I think I'll hand over to you, and if you could give an introduction to your book that's about to be released, that would be brilliant.
So my book is Get Rich or Lie, Trying Ambition and Deceit in the New Influencer Economy. I feel like every time I introduce the book, I describe it a little bit differently. I think fundamentally what I was interested in was the economic story of a generation post-financial crash, and the fact that social media had stepped in to fill the promise that, if you just work hard, you can achieve all your dreams, and the realization of it, I guess, as this place that has become the embodiment of kind of hustle culture, entrepreneurship, self-invention. But in reality, this is a space that is a part of a shifting economic census, which is all about the individual, move away from, I guess, workers' rights towards flexibility, entrepreneurship, precarity, and fundamentally the trappings of a middle-class lifestyle and middle-class expectations of life beginning to become more limited for graduates entering the world of work. And if you look at statistics around kind of home ownership, around wealth, or even just real wages, all of those things are diminished compared to graduates 20, 30 years ago. And so the book was really looking at, I guess, the economic consensus, but via this influencer world, which kind of is a world in which various different trends are converging: the industrialization of celebrity, the magnifying of the self as a commodity, I guess some could say the boom in creativity, but also the galvanization of old models like the boom in kind of pyramid schemes and the logic of pyramid schemes, which is a big part of how I would say a lot of influencer ecosystems work. I think the best example of that now is kind of through like NFTs and crypto, and how to really propel the value in that. That's all solely about building hype and trying to get new consumers in to help prop up, the transfer of wealth from new adopters to early adopters. And so, yeah, my book was about how all of these things are converging at this moment in time to create, this boom in scam culture and fake it till you make it, and how this was almost the dominant orthodoxy of our time. And I've done that through looking at stories. So even though all of that sounds like jargon and kind of like it sounds like academic, the book isn't really that at all. The reading age is very accessible, very, very, very low. It's primarily done through telling of stories of what you would say might be working class or post-working class people trying to fulfill their ambitions, trying to participate in capitalism, but people coming into it with kind of less bargaining power, and therefore how these platforms have incentivized them to be dishonest, in some cases to be exploited by companies, and then also some of the kind of cultural phenomena that has developed around that. So, for example, although I'm looking at a broad range of kind of subcultures and sub-economies, so from gamers and activist influencers to kind of IG baddies, kind of Instagram models, to crypto bros. Although I'm looking at a broad swathe for them, it's like within that, it's like my example of kind of cultural phenomena, which is driven by effectively a story of labor, is like the proliferation of are you familiar with the BBL, the Brazilian butt lift, the kind of Kim Kardashian shape, and that boom in that very kind of fatal surgery a lot of the time can be just presented as like, oh well, people just want to be like Kim Kardashian because she's famous, but actually there are all kinds of economic motives that are driving the surgery, but also the proliferation of the surgeons. So for example, a lot of influencers are, they're offered discounts if they sign people up. Sometimes they offer payment. Sometimes, they are able to. They're able to, if they sign people up, they're able to be rewarded with all kinds of economic incentives which are not declared, and then that has helped the spread of some of these pop-up companies and the spread of Shape. Let alone the prospect of potentially maybe a deal with Fashion Nova or PLT if you look a certain way. And so you're packing the kind of systems or various intersections of economic drivers, but then also within that, some of the exploitations that have been able to take place and some of the dishonesty that has been incentivized. So sometimes a lot of influencers or aspiring influencers, nano or micro influencers, when they have a botched surgery, even if they're in a community of like so-called dolls, where the whole point of the community is to be honest and open and share information so that everyone is able to make good decisions, they were actually not declaring that they were botched because of how the rewards of that space pan out. And so a community that was supposed to be based on kind of equality and sisterhood and honesty had mutated. Likewise, the fact that a lot of them are ambassadors, but on the low, and they are driven by also all kinds of economic incentives that aren't declared, also muddies that relationship with people who are supposed to be their peers. Friends, it's a bit of a step too far, but even these platforms make you think that people are your friends when actually those relationships are far more commercially motivated and driven. So not only is these platforms the site of culture and so-called fraternity and all these things, but fundamentally it's like the encroachment of the rules of commerce into our just day-to-day interactions. And so those are some of the things that I was interested in and writing about, but in a very kind of plain and accessible way, and grounding it in what I hope is the kind of human condition for, embetterment, grounded in aspiration, but also the kind of ideology of the day. And so that's what I set out to do. I mean, whether I achieved that, I'll let the readers decide. Some of the critics think I did, some of the critics think I didn't, but that's what I set out to do anyway.
And so was most of your research kind of done through a process of interviewing people who are involved in this industry?
It's basically what I set out to do was, ethnography is a bit too much of a stretch because it wasn't that intensive, but to largely listen to people's stories and retell those stories and try and bring some color to it, like you would do if you were reading, a substantial piece in the New Yorker or the Atlantic or somewhere that really believes in bringing stories to life. So that I was trying to make it character-driven stories with some depth and some details well added into it. And so the book was always meant to be about the strength of the reportage as opposed to me making a polemic argument. Interestingly enough, I think a critic said that it was quietly polemic. I think that's probably a fair interpretation, but I didn't set out to do that, put it that way. I wanted it to be led by the stories that allow them to pose the questions and to raise them, and then to really hear from people and to see them and to get a sense of who they are.
And were people quite willing to speak to you and kind of share their stories?
Yeah. I what it is that in this space, right, everybody's trying to monetize attention, and so they're just desperate for attention. They're desperate for contact. In a lot of cases, I guess I'm reaching out as a journalist, and so they, see it as someone taking an interest in what they're doing, and they're happy to talk to you. I guess not all of them realized that maybe I was so critical of, I guess, platform capitalism. And then as the questions began to, as I began to ask more questions and go into great detail, that's when they were like, "Oh wow, so you actually are being quite intrusive, you could say." And so people were open to talking to me. I found a few people weren't, but generally most of them were. And because they were they were on the bottom rung of the attention economy, and I'd found them by interesting means. Some of them were scammers and stuff of that nature, who I think they were
scammers, like scamming people out of money, or
scammers,
faking a life.
I mean there are variations, some overtly involved in what they would describe as scammy behavior, others more in the cultural sense of the word rather than the illegal sense of the word. Not all of them though. Some of them just like I guess hustling, you could say. And so most people were happy to talk, but when I was pushing some of them, especially when they were kind of touching on more dubious or ethical questions, and I pushed in those questions, I would say that's when they became more uncomfortable and maybe less cooperative, and maybe there's a bit more of a kickback.
Yeah. And did you speak to people on the other side, the flip side? I mean, like, those who are sponsoring ads, and, like companies or plastic surgery clinics and things like that? Did you?
So I reached out to a lot of them. Unsurprisingly, many of them did not get back to me, and refrained from commenting. In the case of some of the surgeons, the pop-up surgeries, I included some of our interactions. Interestingly, obviously, they're all quite hostile to critique and to journalists, and I guess they're commercial. They're more sensitive, I guess, to knowing what a journalist is likely to ask. And so, some of them I spoke to. Some of them were a bit more standoffish, I would say.
Is there, I mean, speaking of the kind of situation of like plastic surgery and that idea of people, I mean, like literally investing in their body in order to try and, start generating money online and get attention. Yes. Would you say does it seem like it's specifically a kind of female thing? Like, is it gendered? Are there men kind of falling in this trap as well?
A lot of what I was looking at was, what are the demands on different groups? What are the demands that are placed on women, or women who look a certain way? What are the demands that are placed on men, minoritized men as well? What are the pressures that they're under? For a lot of the men, it was like their real value, right, is basically, are you wealthy? If you're not wealthy, you're not of value. So that's really what you have to spend your life doing. That's what you have to spend your commitment to. Women, there was more variety. Obviously, everybody's under pressure to be successful, regardless of gender. With, I think, women who perhaps had been used or had the expectation that the way that they looked was tied to their personhood, some of the pressures on them were more to conform and to look a certain way and to enhance the looks and build on that. An interesting book is called My Body by M. Rata. She's like the quintessential Insta baddie, like, you know, I don't know, 30 million followers, maybe more. She was in a Robin Thicke video. She came out with a really interesting book about being a commoditized woman, and basically her whole life, wherever she's gone, people just say, "Oh, you're the hot girl," and therefore that propelled her into modeling. That propelled her into this kind of work. And it was like, you know, she always was an intellectual, but that was the work, that was the road that was opening up for her, and therefore she followed that road. And most people, I think, the road that they end up on, they just keep going on that road. They don't really switch off it. And I think that's like, could be anything. People get one job out of the university and they're on a particular road, and it's just like, well, I've been doing this job for 2 years now, I've been offered a promotion, I'm on this road. So I think there's an element of that across the board. But what was interesting is just how gendered the labor divide of digital work is. And so although there are men who are under pressure to look a certain way, and, you know, men are having surgery a lot of the time undeclared, and certainly with fast fashion and the commercial industries that support that, it was very particular for men, for women.
Yeah, I mean, I can't, like, when did we start using the term influencer? Like, did it emerge? Like, I mean, of course the word influence existed, but the way we think of what an influencer is, was that born because of Instagram? Like, we didn't call people on Facebook or YouTube influencers before, did we? I mean, I think we used like YouTuber, but I don't know. I guess like Instagram's focus on obviously like images and aesthetics, with them providing all these filters and effect, like, you know, I feel like, yeah, did that really like start off the whole influencer economy in this way?
I think the term influencer is very much attached to Instagram and a certain type of influencer. And then I think in recent years, because the behavior that influencers, because of the behavior influencers, the people realize how effectively that is not tied to Instagram. It's reproduced across all these platforms. And I think there began to be a liberalization of the word. So it's like, why is an influencer this 23-year-old woman who looks a certain way in a bikini, who's commoditizing her life online? But you don't apply that term to a gamer. They don't apply that term to a crypto bro. They don't apply it to other forms of influence where there's more men into it. And so I think that the term got more liberalized. But I think certainly because Instagram became such a cultural and corporate juggernaut, simply because it's basically built on the power of imagery, in a way that YouTube was different, and the platforms have slightly different demands, and the cultivation of community is different. And like, for example, the gamers and the live streamers are all grew up primarily on like Twitch, and then linking their Discord, and that had its own culture. And then sometimes they kind of fed into forums like Reddit, or maybe slightly more niche forums. They had a slightly different vibe, and a way of monetization was different as well. And then obviously the YouTubers, you know, were vloggers, and they were vlogging about very kind of niche issues, and they felt disparate, but they're not really that disparate. If you have a gardener, or you have a makeup artist, or you have, you know, lifestyle, sports, and yeah, so and the way that they had to build up their communities was what it was quite particular to those platforms. So they always, I guess they each had different kind of names, and you know, you have streamers, even though you can stream on Twitter and you can stream on other platforms, but yeah, these are the streamers, these are the YouTubers, these are the Instagram influencers. But I think term influencer, because they were all trying to sell something and cultivate a self, began to be liberalized. And I prefer the term to be liberalized. I think it's more equalizing. And I think that you're then able to not just gender this form of work and labor, which goes beyond then this niche expectation of what you think these people are and what they're doing.
Yeah. It's not just, young women who look a certain way that are allowed to be defined as influencers or whatever.
I mean, and even then, I think my book always set out to look at people who were influencers, but don't carry that moniker with them, and are allowed not to carry that moniker with them. The best example is all these kind of hustle bros and crypto bros and NFT bros who present as businessmen or entrepreneurs or teachers or thought leaders and all these kind of things, when really no, they are just pure influencer, and actually in many cases the most likely to engage in nefarious activity and be evangelical about some of the most exploitative aspects of the economic consensus.
Did you encounter a lot of people or deliberately seek out people who what they presented online was entirely different to the reality? I mean, obviously that's common. Like they're presenting themselves as incredibly wealthy, but in fact, they really have nothing. In terms of financial stability.
I interviewed those people.
And what is the? I don't know how that psychologically affects one to like be performing this image of success to such an extreme and then to not have it.
Well, I mean, fake it till you make it is an accepted orthodoxy of our time, and I mean, I write this in the book, and a lot of the critics have pulled up on it. They seem to have liked this aspect of the book, but it was that fundamentally, it's like if you think about Anna Delvey or Tinder Swindler, all of these people, it's like if you're hustling people, the first and you're kind of you're creating confidence acts. The first person you have to kind of deceive is yourself, and so like the extent of the self-delusion is so deep and real that you wear a mask and you almost believe it, and that belief is kind of what carries through. And so I think that kind of self-deceit, self-delusion was very, very striking. But then what happens is that people were faking it, and then some of them were making it off the back of it. So I mean, it reminded me a little bit of a lot of the experience of writing the book and investigating it reminded me a lot of kind of growing up in the evangelical church, in the role that kind of delusional hope and faith plays in life as a motivational force. Because otherwise, maybe you might just feel like everything's just so impossible without this this delusional faith and hope that just kind of carries you through. And obviously there are pros and cons to that. And I guess one of the driving forces of my book was largely that there had been a loss of political imagination with a generation. And I guess it comes back to that kind of capitalist realism. Mark Fisher, if you're familiar with him, and it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism and everything that carries with it. And so there's like this a lack of imagination amongst us. You just have to hustle and that's it. That's all we can do in life. There's nothing else that we can do. You have to just you just have to do this. And then it's like, is it? There's no alternative. And so it kind of feeds into that. That I think because that was a big part of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I mean, speaking of Anna Delvey, I mean, I just watched the quite terrible TV show, which I thought was dreadful, Inventing Anna, but I did watch the whole thing. And it does kind of glamorize her story or situation. It also kind of puts quite a bit of emphasis on in the court, in the trial at the end, the defense claiming that faking it till you make it is not a crime. I mean, that's basically the whole defense in the show. And I'm, you know,
that's not entirely true either.
Is it not? I mean, like, when I basically couldn't figure out if, I don't know, it's so complicated because, like, where is the line between, you know, that fake kind of level of faking it? Where's the line between it being a crime and not? Like, obviously she scammed people out of money, so that is, I guess, a crime.
No, for sure. I mean, I know what you mean about the drama itself. I mean, it had its moments. It was very kind of soap opera-y, and the accent was very bad.
I don't even mind. It was just drawn out too long. You know, actually the story's not that, it's not got that much going on. It's kind of a bit like, it's like a one-liner. And Anna, I think Anna just says so little herself as a person that there wasn't much to go on.
I think that's
but
fair.
They made the most of it.
I think that's fair.
I mean, through your research, what have you kind of come to realize as perhaps like the most dangerous aspect of faking it till you make it? Does that make sense?
What is the dangerous?
Yeah, like, as in what are the consequences? Like, what are the, like, is it that detrimental to someone to fake it in the hope that they make it? Like, I mean, in terms of, I guess, the BBL, in terms of that, it is, because basically you're having your body modified and by a surgery that might not be regulated. And
I guess for me, I was interested a lot in what the incentives are of these platforms, and this new final form of, this growing form of work that is rising up because the other forms of work and the other economic incentives outside of it are kind of narrowing in what they're offering and the promise of it. And then effectively the encroachment of market rules and commodification and just our ordinary lives. Being on a platform initially for friends or communication, suddenly now this is you have to pivot to content, you have to pivot to work. And so one of the examples that I was looking at was how everything becomes content. Social movements, all these things just become another medium of content, and that can be depoliticizing, and it can lead to the flattening of information. I think, as we can see, like influencer, Instagram, infographic kind of culture. And so I looked a little bit at how BLM as a social movement had become appropriated by influencers who had then become positioned as thought leaders without necessarily being organizers or being even aware or done the readings on what the movements are really about, and what liberation is, and then how they appropriated it and misrepresented it and bastardized it and used it for kind of personal grievances. So one influencer, for example, took the logic of reparations, which is about kind of compensation for the transatlantic slave trade, which, you know, activists are calling for all kinds of corrective-based investments to remedy some of the structural damages and inequalities that have persisted since. And you have these influencers, super affluent by contemporary standards, saying to, you know, I have a black influencer who's removed from organizing anyway. They're not actually organizing or lobbying or coalition building or doing actual political campaigns, saying to white followers, okay, give us money to pay for your white privilege. And then, like, them taking important causes and campaigns and misrepresented them to their audiences, kind of setting back kind of public knowledge and understanding just for personal gain, because they didn't really necessarily get it and they were being quite sharkish. And there are other examples of appropriation of logic and important issues that suddenly become flattened because of the incentives of encouraging, I guess, benefiting from outrage and concern and these kind of things. And it's not because there's not anything to be outraged about. There are things that matter, but it's that the platforms demand you to build celebrity. They're not really built for kind of mass movements where people can be held accountable to each other, where there's a level of kind of real fraternities. Like, this is a platform which is about celebrity and cultivation of self, and therefore there's a limit on what the movements that are here can do because of the very clear profit motive that are built into it. And then people started them looking for things to be outraged about, and so they can then tag their kind of cash up on the end of it. In some cases, you know, dragging people for kind of minute events that they were willfully misunderstanding to drive the algorithm and what the platform persists. So it was like these kind of pivoting to the demands. I guess with the BBL, that's another example of, I guess, pivoting to what you think the algorithm and what you think the trend of the day demands to get that particular type of work. And so it's that kind of, what are the demands of this kind of work? What does it pivot to with kind of the kind of regalvanize with the kind of rebirth of pyramid scheme. Pyramid schemes kind of have been around a long time, and they've largely were quite discredited. They've been heavily discredited, but they've become born again and are thriving on social media because it fits into that logic perfectly. And so people are like, well, you know, that's just how things are. And then within that, people getting scammed, shadow economies, the focus on short-term speculation over kind of real value creation, and then just the continuation and the depoliticization and the lack of imagination in kind of like tackling the worst of the atomization that's taking place and these kind of things. And so it's more about how influencer culture is the continuation of a long economic and social project that, despite all the progressive language around it, is actually the opposite. So those were things that I was interested in.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the pyramid scheme idea I'd come across like when I was doing some research before it into like the kind of digital nomad influencer phenomena. And some of the kind of YouTubing digital nomads had like turned against it, the lifestyle or whatever, and were coming out kind of like calling it out for being a pyramid scheme, and basically like explaining that, you know, like the digital nomad influencers were obviously only purely positive about the lifestyle they were leading. They'd moved to Bali most likely, and they, you know, were living off of whatever work they were doing online. And the whole thing was like enticing more and more people into basically moving to Bali. And you know, Bali's then being completely reconfigured by all these kind of like relatively wealthy white Westerners infiltrating it. And I think, that felt like such a kind of like horribly clear example of how all of this does impact upon about like the real world or like physical space and communities. And just like it's kind of terrifying. But I did like that some people were like turning against it and speaking out about this.
And what was the thing you particularly watched on the Bali affair?
It was, I mean, just loads of different YouTubers, basically.
Okay.
I can't remember names or anything, but if you search on YouTube, like Bali, digital nomad, maybe pyramid scheme, some of them were calling it a pyramid scheme.
Okay.
And yeah.
Yeah, I've heard about Bali. And I was interviewed by an influencer who's off back up to Bali. he's back off.
Oh really? Yeah.
And, and he was telling me, "Oh yeah, I read your book. It's gonna prepare me for it there." And I was like, "Okay."
It's gonna prepare. There is a book actually. It's called Digital Nomad something. I don't know.
Okay.
I can't remember who wrote it or anything. I did read it, but it kind of interviews a lot of people who are living in Bali and associated with the digital nomad community, which is quite interesting. You know, generally people move there and then realize that they can't really earn money, you know, like, because they're either you have to try and be like an influencer or like a freelance photographer or something. And, you know, it's again, the kind of like, you're lured in by this aspiration, but there's like nothing there when you get there.
Yeah.
But those are, I think, the people involved in that, I think, are all, kind of like middle class, of, if we want to call them that, or like of a particular socioeconomic status to begin with. Which I also think someone like Anna Delvey was as well. She's not like I'm wondering, like, how did she even have money to like just get lunch, or like like all these basic things where I'm like, okay, well, she wasn't that poor because she was able to like begin this journey of like being in New York, and which is different to, I guess, a lot of the like influencer types that you're talking about, who are maybe kids at home kind of just trying to do this from absolute scratch. But what do you think is, I don't know, like the kind of main factors in whether someone wins or loses at the influencer game? Or like, is it like what is it that really propels someone to making a career out of it? Is it just monetary privilege or certain looks, or is there more to it?
Well, I mean, I guess this is one of the kind of questions that I ask. What does it mean to be a winner and a loser? Obviously, in just pure looking at it from a kind of labor and power perspective, then it's like the winners are people who are at the top of the pyramid, people who are earning. And a lot of the time, to be honest, that those real people are really in this sphere are the venture capitalists, the shareholders of the platforms themselves, and the people who are able to get on the real pyramid scheme, which is the VC pyramid scheme, where they give you millions of pounds in a company that never has to really make a profit, and you can just keep making losses, and you just keep soaking up investment. Adam Neumann's kind of WeWork type models and things of that nature. But to enter that game, you have to be a real bona fide elite, top education, or be able to walk in, talk in that realm. I guess Anna Delvey's story was somebody trying to enter that space, and which is why I guess you got painted as kind of like a hero. But then I guess it's like even the influencers who achieve success in that they're able to sustain a good income from their lives and their work, their labor online, there is a tiering to it. And I say that a lot of people in my book, even though some of them have succeeded in, I guess, doing social media full time, I say, well, is this really winning? Is this really success? Maybe Molly May, sure, yeah, but she's a blue chip Instagram influencer. But the rest of them, even with generating income, the costs are quite high, I would say, in terms of them doing that work. And some of the stories are quite varied as to looking at just the nature of it and the nature of the value that they're creating and some things of this nature. So I think in pure numbers, it's like income makes you a winner. Earning makes you a winner. They got this big thing in a lot of the hustle cultures, be a six-figure earner. And so it's like, okay, you made it, but actually most people don't make it near that. They're not near that, and the things that they're doing to try and get there are questionable in terms
and
of
probably they get more and more extreme, the kind of things people have to do.
They can do, yeah, they can do. And then fundamentally as well, if they build their life on a platform, the platforms can just change. They don't own the platform. They don't have a vote in the platforms. There's that huge asymmetry in just power.
I realized this even more a couple of weeks ago when my own Instagram account got hacked. And like, I'm not an influencer. I don't, earn a living on social media. But I just suddenly realized, like, oh, Instagram don't have support, basically. You can't speak to a human. Most people that I was like encountering who had been hacked as well never got back into their accounts. There's been a lot of
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
reports on this recently about quite
Yeah, yes,
big influencers not getting back in. But yeah, that I really like.
it's real, and there's an asymmetry there. And if these platforms are so dominant in people's income, like this is a real question of power, let alone resources, in terms of what is produced by everybody's labor. And so these are some of the things that my book was trying to take in, although I guess what people or what readers are most drawn in by is obviously just the color, the characters and the stories. But there is something else underneath. There is something there that else that is present and driving the book, in my view. But it's just about, I feel like stories are more effective than maybe polemic.
Mm. And I guess Instagram or social, sorry, my cats have been going crazy for like half an hour. I mean, Instagram, the very nature of being an influencer is like telling a story about yourself. But I guess you felt like you were getting the real story behind the image, I guess.
Yeah. And also just trying to refocus where you begin the story. I mean, if you focus on the winners in any story, you only get one version of event. But if you focus from people who lost, then that's when I think you get a more holistic picture, I think, of the nature of work, in my view.
Yeah. I mean, it does really feel like a bubble that has to burst at some point, you know. I don't know. Is that...
No, I don't think so. I don't think
really?
it's bursting anytime soon. I think we haven't reached, we're nowhere near the peak.
I guess.
No,
I mean,
like,
then I also think like about, you know, I'm an artist and I often think about artists in relation to influencers because there's obviously a very similar like kind of aspirational labor going on.
yeah.
Not really making money, not just artists, but like cultural workers or like designers, maybe even journalists.
I think they're all types of media work, and the relationship with media work is most clear. But I mean, it's like, when I say we're not at the peak, this is because of like the room there is for things like affiliate links and earning a revenue of some sorts by doing affiliate links. And that's how most of these, a lot of influencers generating income via affiliate links. But then a lot of affiliate links are actually quite peer-to-peer. Like Amazon grew by affiliate links. Uber expanded because of referral codes, which are a form of affiliate links, and just their consumers sharing codes that allow them to get a credit and their friend to get a credit, and then that proliferating. And when you think the most of human consumption is actually offline, you realize that, you know, we haven't fully digitally migrated. And so the more people who are more prevalent and comfortable with digital life, you know, my mom still is not really online like that. The more people that is, the more that's just going to grow. And so we're just not near the peak. What it looks like will probably evolve, but it's why, as an area, it's worth reflection, because it then creates all kinds of asymmetries and power and resources that you don't consider until there's a COVID outbreak and half the country is relying on Amazon. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like, and then suddenly Amazon is the backbone of the country. You're like, what? So it's yeah, I think it's just a story of our time, and this is even before you get to things like fake news, post-truth, information wars, and the political issues which have been probably most considered recently, with kind of Cambridge Analytica and the rise of Trump and Russian influence in elections and things of that nature. Those are the things that we've been discussing, which are fundamentally about influencer-led economies or subcultures or whatever. But it's like, it's more than that now.
Well, I guess it all connects through the idea of like the attention economy, doesn't it?
And
anyone can vie for that attention now.
Yeah. So I think the book was, I guess, driven by that, but focusing on a different aspect of that.
Have you spent much time on TikTok?
A little bit. Yeah.
Because I wonder how that's going to change things, because it feels like the kind of way the algorithm works is so different. Well, and it's, you know, the type of content is very different, I think,
In what
to like
sense?
Instagram or Twitter. Just in the, I mean, it seems ridiculous. It's kind of all the same, but that's what, there's like one small shift in the way a platform structures things, and it now feels like a huge change or something. I think just the kind of, it's all very, well, it's more fast paced. I guess it just feels like fast paced stuff that people can copy really instantly.
I think there's an element of that. Although interestingly, they're expanding the length of a video you can post. I think I saw to 10 minutes. And so I think that there probably will be evolution of sorts. I find it a bit too chaotic, and I think it speaks to, I guess, my generation or age group or whatever. I think there are some. I'm interested to see how it evolves, and I guess some people say the algorithm is more meritocratic. I don't know about that. I think there's a lot of curation that goes on that is not recognized. And actually, in the early days of Instagram, a lot of the biggest accounts or the most followed accounts were heavily influenced by Instagram, kind of picking the big accounts. And this was like individuals as opposed to just like software. And I guess now more software does more of that, like machine learning. So yeah, it's interesting what is new and what isn't really new. But in terms of like some of the kind of people who grow in there, in many cases, it's like it's the same kind of people who maybe would grow on Instagram, albeit with a bit more creativity. So you can't just post a selfie or whatever. You gotta zhuzh it up a bit more.
Yeah, when I first went into TikTok, sorry, go on.
But then you can do that by just copying. Do you know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah,
like,
no, that's exactly what I was going to say. When I first got on
yeah,
there,
you just
I
copy
was
someone
like,
who's popular, and then you're like, okay, you just like, you know, it's just like you have to do is have the Hollywood aesthetic or whatever. Copy somebody who's doing something cool, and then you know, you get the best of both worlds, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. And I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious, and obviously the big thing that they all do is that everybody's in everything or trying to be in as many things as they can, or what they see as like the dominant thing. So Instagram is pivot to TikTok, TikTok is pivot to Instagram. Yeah, everyone's trying to grapple. Everyone's trying to, I guess, diversify their portfolio because they're aware of how little power they actually have on these platforms. What happens if you wake up and you don't have your Instagram following? And one of the people in my book I actually interview who had a lot of followers, their account gets shut down. Like, oh my god, what am I going to do? So
what for?
You read the book.
But okay, sorry, you don't want to give too many spoilers.
But they got shut down. But part of it was the response of a campaign against them, you could say.
Okay. There's another thing I seem to encounter online. I came across this Reddit recently called something like fake illness. And there's basically a lot of people, Redditors, kind of like picking out, basically talking about like certain influencers on Instagram who a lot of their kind of content is about their chronic illness or their, you know, their health condition. And these people on Reddit are basically accusing these Instagrammers of faking it in order to like get attention or like maintain a certain brand. And, you know, maybe these are just Reddit assholes, quite possibly, or I don't know why these accusations would start, but I just thought that was interesting that we're now at a point where people think others are faking like illness to get ahead. I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of suspicion. I think people are aware that there's a lot of misrepresentation and spin. Like, usually the response is everybody's doing it, so I'll do it too. But increasingly, there's also a backlash against it in some form, and that it kind of manifests in suspicion. And I guess this is also a byproduct of the fact that these platforms cultivate celebrity out of ordinary people and industrialize it. which is why it's not great for activism, because then it isolates maybe people who do have a care, but then suddenly they propelled into celebrity, isolated from other people who they might have common common ground with, and then it's just like platforms that's supposed to theoretically connect people actually just further polarize them by the kind of incentive that it rewards it with. So that's interesting, this whole authenticity thing. Can you have authenticity online? It's like, well, fundamentally, if there's a profit motive, not really. So, but that's an issue.
Do you are you aware of like any schools kind of teaching kids about the kind of manipulation of social media practices? And
no, but I would assume that some are. I would assume so. I think so. Yeah, I think I've seen some murmurs of that, but
yeah.
I didn't really go into that.
Yeah. No, it would be interesting to know, because apparently 1 in 5 children now say they want to be an influencer when they grow up.
Yeah.
I think I read that in the Break the Internet by Olivia Yallop. She quotes that stat, which is also probably, you know, like when I was a kid, everyone wanted to be like an astronaut or like, you know, taste chocolate as a job. So, you know, it's not, it doesn't necessarily mean that much, but it's interesting that that's even in the consciousness of like kids.
I mean, they're big consumers of content, so it makes sense that they would want to participate in that, and they all have accounts, and they're aware of what it can potentially bring.
Do you have any thoughts on like what Instagram or Meta or like a social media provider could or should do to tackle this kind of the problem of exploitation within the influencer economy?
I mean,
I don't.
I mean, it depends on where you're coming from. I mean, it's like there's different levels to it. From what I've seen, the regulators themselves, the ASA, like they just don't have the skills or the awareness or the ability or the reach to really do that much. Software can be maybe enhanced to recognize covert ads, to particularly monitor more dubious or harmful aspects or marketing products like surgeries and some of these dubious financial projects, the NFTs. More could be done in those spaces. But then fundamentally, it's an economic story. It's about economic values, and about the fact that people are pivoting to this as labor because of the other challenges with pay and real wages and opportunity, aspiration in housing, all these other kind of questions, which really are the one thing that need to be addressed. And so I think for me, it's about putting it in the context of what is happening in this economic moment.
Yeah. There was a campaign about 8-10 years ago, something like that. I think it was a group of artists. The campaign was called Wages for Facebook. And yeah, I thought of that again today, and I don't know, like, do you think we should get wages for Instagram, like for being users
I don't know.
of this platform?
My thoughts and solutions like that are not so pronounced, but certainly if millions upon millions of people are earning their income from some of these platforms, then there needs to be a redistribution of agency. Otherwise, it begins to look like a racket. Changing of algorithms, the lack of transparency, rules, maybe even votes, and say like these things have to be considered, I think, because they matter too much now, and they're only going to matter even more, and so it becomes a question of power, and the asymmetry just presents too many challenges. So sometimes a private company just gets too big, and if you become just too big and too powerful, you can say, well, okay, well done for building this company into this thing, but now you've got too powerful, I'm afraid. So that has to be a consideration, I think.
Yeah. Or should we all stop using social media? I don't know.
That'd be great too. But
it feels like when I got my Instagram hacked stupidly, I was like, I am never going to use it again. That's me. I'm done. Until like I managed to get back in, and then I was like, oh, thank God, I'm back. I'm back home with all my little pictures.
And that fundamentally that's power, especially.
I mean, I encountered like when I was looking on Reddit for advice on how to get back into Instagram. There's a lot of young kids there kind of saying they've been hacked and that they're suicidal, and you know they feel like they're cut off from all their friends, from everything, and I guess it's that people feel invisible if they're not there.
That's the power of the herd, I guess. I mean, I resisted Facebook for years, but then I was at university, and it was like I didn't know what was happening, so you have to be on it to know what's happening. So that's a part of it. But I think it's one thing not knowing what's happening, and another thing when your kind of wage and income is tied to that, your livelihood is tied to that. Let alone your social life too. And then that's when it becomes so all-encompassing.
I mean, it feels as complicated whether you're on it or not, because if you're not, then there's different complications about, I don't know, jobs expect you to have social media accounts or be on LinkedIn or this and that. Yeah, I think there's no easy relationship to have with it.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Maybe. Okay, I think we should leave it there. Anyway, thank you so much. That was really great.
Thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah, I really look forward to reading the book.